He wasn't holding up the line on purpose. Hell, nobody ever is. But when you're 84 and your fingers don't work the way they used to, counting change becomes an art form that impatient people don't appreciate. The man behind him made that crystal clear. You should really shop online next time, Grandpa. Or just stay home. The cashier said nothing. The other customers said nothing, but the teenager standing next to the old man, he walked straight to the customer service desk, picked up the PA microphone, and said 5 words that stopped the entire store cold. The man at checkout. What happened next had grown adults crying in the cereal aisle. If stories like this remind you why respect matters, hit that subscribe button now. This one's going to stick with you. Most people don't really see grocery stores, you know. They see the stuff they need to buy, maybe notice if the lines are long or if they're out of their favorite brand of something. But they don't see the place itself. The way the fluorescent lights flicker just a little too much in aisle 7. How the automatic doors stick for half a second before deciding to open. The fact that register 6 always has that one key that sticks when you're trying to ring up bananas. Harold Bennett saw all of it. He'd been shopping at Miller's Market in Cedar Falls, Iowa every Saturday for the better part of 3 years now. Ever since Dorothy passed and he had to figure out how to buy groceries for one person instead of 2. 47 years of marriage, and he'd never once done the weekly shopping alone. Dorothy had a system, coupons organized by expiration date, a list written in that careful handwriting teachers used to have, routes through the store that made sense if you'd been doing it since 1976. Harold's system was different. He wrote his list on whatever piece of paper was handy, usually the back of an electric bill or a church bulletin. He forgot things. He'd walk past the bread aisle twice before remembering he needed a loaf. And God help him when they moved the peanut butter to a different shelf. He'd spend 10 minutes looking for it in the old spot. Like maybe it would materialize if he just waited long enough. But he was getting better at it, slowly. The way you get better at anything when you don't have a choice. This particular Saturday in November, Harold was wearing his usual weekend uniform, flannel shirt that had seen better decades but was still comfortable, pressed khakis because Dorothy had always said a man should look presentable in public, and the worn leather shoes he'd been resoling for 15 years because they finally fit his feet just right. His Korean War veteran cap sat at the precise angle he'd been wearing it since 1953. The small service pin catching the fluorescent light whenever he turned his head. The cane was new. Well, 6 months new. His doctor had insisted after Harold took that tumble down the church steps last spring. Harold hated the thing, but he hated the idea of taking another fall even more. So he carried it, leaning it against shopping carts and counters with the careful precision of a man who'd learned that independence meant adapting, not pretending you were 25 forever, walking beside him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but actually wanting to be exactly where he was, stood Noah Bennett. 15 years old, tall for his age in that gangly way teenagers get when their bones grow faster than the rest of them catches up. His hoodie was that particular shade of gray that somehow looked good on every kid between the ages of 12 and 18. Sleeves pushed up to his elbows because Iowa in November couldn't decide if it was fall or winter, yet Noah had been coming on these Saturday grocery runs for about 4 months now. It started after Harold mentioned to his daughter Karen that he'd gotten confused trying to find the checkout one day and ended up wandering around the back of the store for 20 minutes before a stock clerk helped him out. Karen, being Karen, immediately started talking about how maybe it was time for Dad to consider not driving anymore. Maybe look into one of those grocery delivery services. Maybe think about moving closer to family. Harold shut that conversation down fast. But Noah, who'd been sitting at the kitchen table doing homework and listening to his mom worry out loud about Grandpa, made a different suggestion. What if I just went with him? Not because his mom asked, not because anyone made him, because Harold was his grandfather, and 15 years of Saturday mornings meant Noah knew exactly what Dorothy's pot roast smelled like and how. Harold told the same 3 stories about flying helicopters in Korea and why the old man always bought 2 kinds of ice cream even though he claimed he was watching his sugar. The routine had developed organically. Harold would pick Noah up at 9:30. They'd drive the 12 minutes to Miller's Market in Harold's immaculately maintained 1998 Buick LeSabre, and they'd work through the list together. Harold still insisted on pushing the cart. I'm old, not helpless, but Noah had quietly taken over the job of reaching things on high shelves and reading expiration dates when the print was too small for Harold's eyes to make out clearly. It wasn't charity, it was partnership. The kind that develops between people who respect each other enough to acknowledge limitations without making them feel like failures. Today's list was typical. Bread, milk, the good butter, not the store brand. Canned soup for the days when cooking felt like too much work. Apples, because Harold's doctor said he needed more fruit. And 2 bottles of that root beer Dorothy used to buy for Sunday dinners, even though Harold was the only one who drank it, and he only had maybe 1 glass a week. They moved through the store with the comfortable efficiency of a routine that worked. Harold consulted his list, written in the careful block letters he'd learned in the army. Noah grabbed a cart that didn't have a wobbly wheel and made sure Harold's cane stayed within easy reach. They didn't talk much, never had needed to. Harold would point at something, Noah would reach for it, and they'd move on to the next aisle. The only real conversation happened in the cereal aisle, where Noah tried to convince Harold to try something other than cornflakes. They make ones with blueberries now, Grandpa. Real blueberries. Cornflakes were good enough for your grandmother, Harold replied, reaching for the familiar yellow box. They're good enough for me, but these ones have antioxidants. Cornflakes have corn. That's an antioxidant. That's not how it works. Says who? Noah grinned. It was an old argument, comfortable as worn furniture. Harold would buy cornflakes, Noah would shake his head, and next week they'd have the exact same conversation. Some traditions were worth maintaining. By the time they reached the checkout lanes, the Saturday afternoon crowd had settled in. Miller's Market only had 8 registers, and on weekends they usually had 5 open. The lines stretched back into the aisles, filled with families stocking up for the week, college students buying ramen and energy drinks, and the usual collection of people who'd put off shopping until the last possible minute and were now paying the price in wait time. Harold surveyed the options with the strategic mind that had once been used to plan helicopter reconnaissance routes over hostile territory. Register 3 had a cashier who was still learning the codes for produce. Register 5 was moving fast, but the woman in front was arguing about a coupon. Register 6 had Marissa working, and Harold liked Marissa. She was patient. She smiled at him like he was a person, not an inconvenience. 6 looks good, Harold said, steering toward the shorter line. Marissa's working, Noah observed. She always asks about your helicopter stories. She's a good kid. Reminds me of your grandmother when she was that age. They took their place behind 2 other customers and began the familiar routine of unloading their cart. Harold insisted on doing this himself, placing each item on the conveyor belt with the careful attention to organization that Dorothy had taught him. Heavy things first, cold things together, nothing that could get crushed under something else. The line moved slowly, but that was normal for Saturday afternoon. Harold didn't mind waiting. After 84 years, he'd learned that rushing through life meant missing most of it. Besides, he liked watching people. The young mother ahead of them was trying to keep 2 toddlers entertained while unloading a cart that looked like she was preparing for a siege. The man in front of her was buying nothing but frozen dinners and energy drinks, probably a college student from uni. Noah pulled out his phone, but didn't put in earbuds. He'd learned that Harold liked having someone to quietly comment to about the people around them. Not gossip, exactly. More like anthropological observation. That guy's buying enough energy drinks to power a small city, Noah murmured. When I was his age, we got our energy from coffee and spite, Harold replied. Times change, Grandpa. Some changes are improvements. Some aren't. It was while they were having this perfectly ordinary conversation that the man stepped into line behind them. You know how some people carry their impatience like a weapon. This guy was one of those. Mid-40s, wearing the kind of clothes that cost too much and were designed to let everyone know it. His shirt was pressed to military precision. His shoes were polished to a shine that would have impressed Harold's old drill sergeant, and his leather briefcase looked like it cost more than Harold's monthly Social Security check, but it was his attitude that filled the space around him like a bad smell. The way he checked his watch every 30 seconds, the exaggerated sighs when the line didn't move fast enough for his liking, the constant phone checking, like he was expecting a call that would change the course of human history. Harold noticed him, the way you notice storm clouds gathering on the horizon. But Harold had lived through enough storms, literal and metaphorical, to know that sometimes the best strategy was to mind your own business and let other people's weather pass by without getting caught in it. Noah noticed him too. And unlike his grandfather, Noah had not yet learned the art of strategic patience. The line moved forward. The young mother with the toddlers finished her transaction and wrestled her kids toward the exit. The college student with the energy drinks paid with a credit card and headed for the door. And suddenly Harold and Noah were at the front of the line, with Marissa smiling at them from behind register 6. "How are you doing today, Mr. Bennett?" "Can't complain," Harold replied, beginning to unload the cart with his usual methodical care. "How's school going?" Marissa was studying to be a teacher, and Harold always asked about her classes. She was working at Miller's to pay for college, and Harold respected that kind of determination. Reminded him of Dorothy, who'd worked her way through nursing school 1 class at a time while raising 3 kids. "Good. We're studying about the Korean War in my history class. I keep thinking about those stories you told me." "Ancient history now," Harold said, but Noah caught the small smile. Harold didn't talk about the war much, but when he did, it was usually to young people who asked the right questions. Behind them, the man in the expensive clothes made a sound that wasn't quite a sigh, but wasn't quite a growl either. Harold's shoulders tensed slightly, just enough for Noah to notice. Marissa began scanning their items with the efficient rhythm of someone who'd been doing this job long enough to make it look easy. Bread, milk, butter, soup. Each beep of the scanner was accompanied by the familiar ritual of items, moving from cart to counter to bag. But then Harold reached for his wallet. It was an old wallet, leather worn soft by decades of use, held together by a rubber band because the original clasp had given up years ago. Harold's fingers, stiff with arthritis and thick with the accumulated calluses of 40 years of mechanical work, fumbled slightly with the rubber band. The man behind them made another noise, louder this time. Harold got the wallet open and began counting change. Not because he couldn't afford to pay with bills. Harold had money, saved carefully over decades of living below his means, but because paying exact change was something Dorothy had always done, and maintaining her small traditions felt like keeping her memory alive. Quarter, 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 dime. His fingers moved slowly, precisely, separating coins by denomination with the methodical care he'd once used to sort bolts and washers in his shop. "Take your time, Mr. Bennett," Marissa said softly. She'd seen this routine before. Never minded it. Harold was one of her favorite customers, always polite, always interested in how she was doing, always had exact change even if it took a few minutes to count it out. But the man behind them had apparently reached his limit of patience. "Seriously?" His voice cut through the quiet transaction like a knife. "This is ridiculous." Harold's fingers paused for just a moment. Noah's head turned slowly, like a gun turret tracking a target. "You should really shop online next time, Grandpa," the man continued, his voice carrying the particular brand of condescension reserved for people who think their time is more valuable than everyone else's. "Or just stay home. Some of us have places to be." The store around them didn't exactly go quiet. There were still other conversations happening, other registers beeping, shopping carts rolling across linoleum floors. But something shifted in the immediate area. The kind of shift that happens when someone crosses a line that shouldn't be crossed. Harold's face didn't change expression. 84 years of life had taught him that some people were just like that, impatient, inconsiderate, unable to see past their own immediate needs. But his shoulders drooped slightly, and Noah caught the way his grandfather's hands trembled just a little more as he continued counting change. "Sorry," Harold murmured to Marissa, not looking back at the man behind him. "These old fingers don't work like they used to." "You're fine, Mr. Bennett," Marissa replied, but there was steel in her voice now. She'd worked retail long enough to recognize bullying when she saw it. The man wasn't finished. "Look, I get it. You're old. But that doesn't mean you get to hold up the entire line because you can't figure out how money works. Maybe you shouldn't be driving. Maybe you shouldn't be shopping alone. Maybe someone should be taking care of you instead of letting you wander around by yourself, making everyone else's day longer." That's when Noah moved, not fast, not angry, but with the kind of deliberate purpose that Harold recognized from his own military training. The boy stepped back from the counter, looked at his grandfather with eyes that were suddenly much older than 15. and said in a voice that was perfectly calm and perfectly clear, "I'll be right back, Grandpa." And then he walked away, not toward the exit, not toward the customer service desk. Straight back behind the registers, past the swinging door marked "Employees Only," moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going and what he planned to do when he got there. Harold blinked, confused. Noah? But Noah was already gone, disappeared into the back of the store like smoke. The man behind them scoffed. Finally, maybe someone's going to get a manager to speed this up. Marissa finished scanning the last item, the root beer that Harold bought every week, even though he was the only one who drank it, and looked at the total on her screen. "That'll be $47.83, Mr. Bennett." Harold nodded and went back to counting his change, but his movements were slower now, more uncertain. The encounter had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. He'd dealt with impatient people before, but something about this man's tone, the casual cruelty of suggesting he shouldn't be allowed to live independently, had hit a nerve that was still raw from losing Dorothy. $47.83, he repeated softly, adding coins to the pile in his palm. The man behind them checked his watch again and made that same not quite sigh, not quite growl sound. Other people in line were starting to look uncomfortable. The woman behind the impatient man kept glancing at Harold with sympathy, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how to intervene without making the situation worse. And then the PA system crackled to life. Miller's Market had the kind of old-fashioned intercom system that was installed sometime in the 1980s and never updated. It worked fine, but there was always a slight electronic buzz before anyone spoke, and the speakers had that tinny quality that made every announcement sound like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Usually, the PA was used for practical things: cleanup on aisle 4, customer assistance needed in produce, the deli will be closing in 10 minutes. Sometimes the manager would announce a sale or remind everyone that the store would be closing soon. But today, the voice that came through the speakers wasn't the manager's. It was a teenage boy's voice. Clear, steady, and carrying the kind of quiet authority that made everyone in the store stop what they were doing and listen. "Hi, this is Noah Bennett." Harold's eyes went wide. Around the store, people paused mid-conversation, mid-transaction, mid-everything. Because this wasn't a store announcement. This was something else entirely. "I'm standing next to my grandfather at Register 6. The man behind us just told him he shouldn't be allowed to shop alone." The impatient man's face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. He looked around frantically, suddenly aware that every eye in the store was either looking at him or looking for him. "I'd like to tell you about my grandfather." Noah's voice was calm, conversational even, but it carried through the store with the weight of absolute conviction. This wasn't a teenager having a tantrum. This was something much more powerful. "His name is Harold Bennett. He's 84 years old. He flew helicopters in Korea before most of us were born." The man in the expensive clothes took a step backward, as if distance might somehow make this less real. He flew reconnaissance missions over live fire zones while people were shooting at him. He helped extract wounded soldiers from behind enemy lines. He has more hours in the air under combat conditions than most of us have behind the wheel of a car. All around the store, people had stopped pretending to shop. Shopping carts sat abandoned in aisles. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the other cashiers had stopped scanning items. Listening to this impromptu biography crackling through speakers that had never carried anything more important than a sale on ground beef. After the war, he came home and worked as a mechanic. For 40 years. Got up every morning at 5, worked until 6, came home and helped my grandmother raise 3 kids. He taught all of us how to change oil, how to fix a leaky faucet, how to treat people with respect even when they don't deserve it. Harold was staring at the speaker mounted above register 6 like it might suddenly explain how his grandson had gotten access to the store's PA system. His hands, which had been shaking slightly from arthritis and nerves, were now completely still. He's been shopping here every Saturday for 3 years. Ever since my grandmother died and he had to learn how to do things she'd always done. He counts his change because that's what she taught him to do. He takes his time because rushing through life means missing the important parts. The man behind them was looking around desperately as if searching for an escape route. But the line had filled in behind him, and the people on either side were no longer looking sympathetic to his plight. So yes, he's old. Yes, he's slow. But he's not holding anyone up. He's just living his life with the same dignity and precision he's had for 8 decades. And if you think his age makes him less deserving of basic respect, then you don't understand what respect means. A woman 2 aisles over was wiping her eyes. An elderly man near the pharmacy had stopped to listen, nodding slowly as Noah's words echoed through the store. He doesn't owe you speed. He doesn't owe you convenience. He paid for the right to shop here with decades of service to his country and his community. And if you can't wait an extra minute for a man who's earned the right to count his change, however he wants, then maybe you're the one who should consider shopping somewhere else. The silence that followed was complete. Not just quiet, absolutely silent, as if the entire store was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The PA system clicked off with that same electronic buzz it had started with, and 30 seconds later, Noah reappeared from behind the employee entrance, walking back to register 6 with his hands in his pockets and his face slightly flushed, but his expression determined. The man in the expensive clothes stood frozen for a moment longer, looking around at the faces staring at him from every direction. Then, without a word, he stepped out of line, abandoned his cart, and walked quickly toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't say anything. He just left, his carefully polished shoes clicking against the linoleum until the automatic doors closed behind him. The silence stretched for another few seconds. Then Marissa cleared her throat softly and said, "That'll be $47.83, Mr. Bennett." Harold looked down at the change in his palm, then up at his grandson. Noah had moved back to his spot beside the cart, acting like nothing unusual had happened. As if giving impromptu speeches over grocery store PA systems was just a normal part of his Saturday routine. Noah ... Harold started. "You counted $47.83, right, Grandpa?" Noah asked, nodding toward the money in Harold's hand. Harold looked at the coins again, then handed them to Marissa. She counted them quickly, exactly $47.83, and opened the register. "Perfect as always, Mr. Bennett," she said, but her voice was slightly thick with emotion. As Marissa bagged their groceries, Harold noticed something he'd never seen before. The woman who had been standing behind the impatient man stepped forward and quietly handed Marissa a $20 bill. "Put this toward their next shopping trip," she said softly. "Oh, that's not necessary," Harold protested. "Yes, it is," the woman replied firmly. "It absolutely is." Before Harold could object further, another customer appeared, an older man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap. He didn't say anything, just placed a $10 bill on the counter next to the 20 and nodded at Harold with the kind of recognition that passes between people who've served. Then a young woman with 2 small children stepped up and added a 5 to the growing pile. "For being patient with the rest of us," she said simply. "Really, this isn't necessary," Harold tried again. But Marissa was already putting the money in an envelope with Harold's name on it. "Store policy," she said with a smile that suggested this was not, in fact, store policy. "We'll keep it here for your next visit." As they walked toward the exit, Harold pushing the cart while Noah carried the bags, the store seemed to exhale. Conversations resumed, registers began beeping again, and the normal rhythm of Saturday afternoon shopping settled back into place. But as they passed other customers, Harold noticed something different. People were looking at him. Not through him, not around him, but at him. A young store employee stocking shelves nodded respectfully. An elderly woman selecting apples smiled and said, "Thank you for your service." A middle-aged man Harold didn't recognize simply said, "Good to see you, sir." They reached the parking lot before Harold finally spoke. "Where did you learn to do that?" Noah was loading groceries into the trunk of the Buick with the same methodical care Harold brought to everything else. "Do what?" "The PA system." "How did you know how to use it?" "I asked Marissa about it once. She showed me where it was, said sometimes they let employees make announcements about sales and stuff." "And she just let you use it?" Noah grinned. "I didn't exactly ask permission." Harold closed the trunk and looked at his grandson, really looked at him. When had this kid gotten so tall? When had his voice gotten so steady? When had he learned to speak with that kind of quiet authority? "You didn't have to do that," Harold said finally. "Yeah, I did." Noah's expression was serious now. Someone had to. They stood in the parking lot for a moment, grocery cart between them, November wind, carrying the smell of leaves and approaching winter. Around them, other families were loading cars and heading home to Saturday afternoon routines, football games on TV, homework at kitchen tables, dinners that someone who loved them had planned and prepared. "Your father would have been proud," Harold said quietly. Noah's dad had died in a car accident when Noah was 12. Harold had stepped in to help where he could, but it had never been about replacing anyone. Just about being present, being family. "So would Grandma," Noah replied, and they both knew that was true. Dorothy had never tolerated bullies, never backed down from standing up for what was right, never let anyone in her family face trouble alone. They drove home in comfortable silence, the same route they'd been taking every Saturday for months. Past the high school where Noah played baseball, past the church where Harold had married Dorothy 63 years ago, past the neighborhood where 3 generations of Bennetts had learned what it meant to be family. At home, they unloaded groceries with the same quiet efficiency they brought to everything else. Harold put away the canned soup and the good butter while Noah stocked the refrigerator. The root beer went into the door compartment, right next to the milk Dorothy had always insisted on buying, even though Harold was the only one who drank. Either one. Later that evening, after Noah had gone home and Harold was sitting in his chair watching the news, his phone rang. It was his daughter Karen, Noah's mother. "Dad, Noah told me what happened today. Did he? Are you okay?" "He said some man was giving you trouble at the store." Harold thought about that. Was he okay? An hour ago, he might have said yes. But something had changed this afternoon. Not just because someone had been rude to him. He dealt with worse. But because his grandson had stood up for him, had seen him not as a burden or a problem to be managed, but as a person worth defending. "I'm fine," Harold said finally. Better than fine, actually. Noah said he used the store's PA system. He did. I should probably be mad at him for that. Probably, but I'm not. Good, you raised him right. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Karen said, "We both did, Dad. You and Mom both had a hand in that." After they hung up, Harold sat in his chair for a long time, thinking about courage and dignity and the way respect could be lost and found in the space of a single conversation. He thought about Dorothy, who would have loved seeing their grandson stand up to a bully with nothing but truth and a microphone. He thought about Saturday mornings and the patient way. Noah reached for items on high shelves without being asked. Mostly, though, he thought about the way his grandson's voice had sounded over that PA system. Steady, sure, unafraid. Like a man who knew right from wrong and wasn't willing to compromise on either one. The next Saturday, Harold and Noah returned to Miller's Market for their usual shopping trip. Word had spread, as word tends to do in small communities, and several people stopped to shake Harold's hand or thank him for his service. The store manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Patterson, made a point of introducing herself and assuring Harold that he was always welcome to take whatever time he needed. Marissa was working Register 6 again, and when she saw them approaching, she smiled. "How are you doing today, Mr. Bennett?" "Can't complain," Harold replied, beginning to unload their cart. "How's school?" "Good. We finished studying the Korean War. I aced the test." "I should hope so," Harold said with a small smile. "You had a good source." When it came time to pay, Harold reached for his wallet and began counting change with the same methodical precision he'd always used. No one behind them said a word. In fact, a woman 2 people back quietly told her impatient teenager to hush. When he started to complain about the weight dot as Harold finished counting exact change, Marissa handed him his receipt and said, "Mr. Bennett, that envelope we've been keeping for you, it's up to $47 now." People keep adding to it. Harold looked at Noah, who shrugged with the casual indifference that teenagers use to hide the things they care most about. "I think," Harold said finally, "we'll save that for a special occasion. Because sometimes dignity isn't about being seen or recognized or defended. Sometimes it's just about being allowed to count your change in peace, knowing that the people who matter understand that moving slowly through the world isn't the same thing as being in anyone's way, and sometimes, when you're lucky enough to have a grandson who understands that difference, you get to learn that respect isn't something you have to demand. Sometimes It's something that other people are willing to fight for on your behalf, because that's what family does. That's what decent people do. And that's what happens when a 15-year-old kid with access to a PA system decides that his grandfather's dignity is worth more than some stranger's impatience. Harold kept shopping at Miller's Market every Saturday until he was 91 years old. Noah kept going with him until he left for college, and then came home every weekend freshman year to continue the tradition. The store kept that envelope at customer service until Harold finally agreed to use it to buy ingredients for the paid guru. Big family dinner he hosted the Christmas before he passed. But that's a story for another time. This story is about a Saturday afternoon when the world was reminded that respect isn't about age or convenience or how fast you can count change. It's about recognizing that every person carrying groceries, waiting in lines, and trying to live their life with dignity has earned the right to do so without harassment from people who think their time is worth more than someone else's humanity. And sometimes, when the adults in the room forget that lesson, it takes a teenager with a microphone to remind everyone what common decency sounds like. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that respect isn't optional, it's required. Hit that subscribe button for more stories about the quiet courage it takes to defend what's right, even when no one's watching. And tell us in the comments, who's the person in your life who deserves this kind of defense? Because we all know someone who's earned our respect and our protection. See you next time, right here, with another story about the moments that remind us what really matters.